And Nicholas Prosper, the 19-year-old who wanted to go down as the most famous killer in history, has been told he will spend at least 48 years in prison for murdering his mother and siblings.
Yes, this is the breaking news today. Chillingly, the Luton teenager had also planned to carry out a massacre at his old primary school, fantasising about shooting a classroom of 30 children aged 4 and 5 alongside their teachers.
Well, let's go straight to Luton Crown Court now and speak to our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, this news just breaking now, an absolutely sensational and, frankly, terrifying story.
Well, indeed, the judge, Mrs Justice Chima Grubb, has just passed that sentence, a minimum tariff of 49 years in prison. So 49 years before he is even eligible to be considered for parole. He has time served, of course, having been arrested earlier last year. So with that time off, it will be just over 48 years in prison. But that's before he will even be considered and will have to be assessed before he is eventually released. But clearly, the judge had taken into consideration whether in this case, with 3 victims, his mother and 2 of his siblings murdered by him, whether this justified a whole life tariff. But taking all of the factors, she said, into consideration, including the fact that he was suffering from autism spectrum disorder, that she felt that a whole life tariff was not justified in this instance, and that's why she has come up with that minimum tariff of 49 years in jail. Now, this case happened on the 13th of September last year, the horrific murders of Nicholas Prosper's mother, Juliana, his 13-year-old sister, Giselle, and 16-year-old brother, Tyler, at the block of flats they lived in Luton. This was to be the prelude for a much greater tragedy, a disaster for Luton, according to the judge, because it was Nicholas Prosper's plan to go armed with the shotgun that he'd used to kill those family members to his former primary school, St Joseph's Catholic Primary School in Luton, and specifically he was going to target those very young children in the early years cohort at this particular primary school. And he had a target in mind, according to prosecutors. He was planning to kill 30 children aged between 4 and 5, as well as 2 teachers, and including, of course, the murder of his family members. That would take the death toll under him to 35. And the reason he wanted to do this, according to the prosecution laying out his case, is because he wanted the notoriety of being the worst mass murderer in recent times. He had researched and modelled himself on the Sandy Hook school shootings in the United States, Columbine and Virginia Tech as well. These school massacres that still ring for most people, you know, the horrific tragedy that occurred in these school shootings. He had wanted to emulate those mass murderers and actually to outdo them, but fate got in the way on that day, the 13th of September last year, when he looked to shoot dead those family members. He wanted to kill them in their sleep, but somehow his mother either was awoken somehow and managed to get an indication of what was going on. There was then a very violent struggle in the house that lasted some time, where the mother and then the 2 siblings were running from this young man who was chasing them around the flat with a shotgun. The mother was shot first. She was shot in the head and fatally wounded. Then 13-year-old Giselle, who was shot first of all in the back of the head from some distance. That grazed her. She ran into the living room, we're told, and tried to hide under a table. At that point, Nicholas Prosper caught up with her and then shot her through the head, sustaining, of course, fatal injuries as well. Then the 16-year-old brother was woken by all of the commotion, the sound of the shotguns. Tyler had run to the kitchen to try to hide from his brother, but he was pursued in there. He was shot in the chest, and then he was stabbed and slashed, according to the prosecutor, more than 100 times, pleading with his brother throughout to stop and to save him and not to kill him. But at one point, Tyler rose to his feet, we're told managed to escape into the hallway, but then was again shot by Nicholas Prosper in the head and fatally wounded. So, of course, in themselves, that the murders of those three family members were absolutely horrific in nature and would have, without a doubt, for someone aged over 21, probably have carried a whole life tariff. But when someone is under 20 years of age, there is a special threshold that has to be crossed in a crime before a whole life tariff can be passed. If that had been passed in this case, he would have been the youngest person ever to receive a whole life tariff. The judge, clearly in her calculations, felt that as horrific as the crimes were in terms of the murder of those family members and the plan to carry it out an even more hideous crime in terms of this school massacre, still didn't cross that threshold into a whole life tariff. We should say that the plans to carry out the school massacre were thwarted by the fact that those family members had awoken and this violent fight had ensued in the flat, because with firing off the shotgun in the way that he did, with all the screams and shouts, neighbours then called the police. He was forced to flee the house at about 5:30 in the morning before the police arrived, and there was just so many police around Luton searching for him. He knew that the chances of him actually getting to a school that wasn't on lockdown to carry out his massacre had disappeared, so he handed himself over to the police. In fact, I think we might have a video clip of the moment that Nicholas Prosper was arrested by those Bedfordshire police officers in Luton.
You don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention, when questioned, subject to today's trial in court. Anything you do say may be given as evidence. What road are we on? Birmingham Road. 426, priority. Birmingham Road, I think we've got the offender.
It's not murder.
Yes, we've got a male here. He's presented himself to us. Can we just get another unit down here, please?
Well, the judge has said in this case that Nicholas Prosper showed absolutely no remorse for his crimes. In fact, he seemed to take pride on occasions in what he had done, the harm that he had inflicted on those family members, and what he was planning, of course, to do at that school, St Joseph's Primary School here in Luton, as well as being diagnosed as being on the autism spectrum by a psychiatrist. Psychiatrist also noted that there were some traits to his personality that could not be explained by autism spectrum disorder, and that actually his extreme lack of remorse and empathy were explained with traits that were more akin to psychopathy, to psychopathic traits.
So, Mark, just to clarify, was autism a mitigating factor in this sentencing, or not really?
Well, to an extent, but when it's a crime as horrific as this, it is only degrees. So there was a mitigating factor in the autism spectrum disorder, which clearly meant that this was an individual who had very significant, well, not very significant, but significant developmental issues. He was someone that was antisocial, that hid himself away in the bedroom for much of the time. He had a fascination with video games, gory, horrific video games. He had an obsession as well with paedophilia. According to the prosecutors, he had some 200 indecent images of children, including 19 of the most serious images involving the sexual rape of children as well. So a very troubled, disturbed young man who, as I say, the judge said in their sentencing remarks, had shown absolutely no remorse for the crimes that he committed. Well, now he is heading off to prison to begin that 49-year jail term, less the time, of course, he has already served. And just, we say 49 years, that is only the time then that he is eligible for parole. It does not mean that those assessing him at that time in the future will decide to release him.
Well, Mark White, thank you so much for that extraordinary report. Seeing those images are really, really chilling. And, of course, we'll be catching up with you, Mark, later in the programme. Just the most extraordinary
Goodness me, what do you make of that? I mean, that additional detail that he had an obsession with paedophilia as well. Was he seeking some kind of sexual gratification from massacring those children, if that had gone to plan, if there's 30 children?
4- and 5-year-olds.
I mean, disgusting, isn't it? And the use of autism, we see this a lot as a mitigating factor in sentencing. It seems that the judge deemed that this Nicholas Prosper had it was a psychopath, essentially, a sociopath. But we do see it a lot, and it's deeply offensive to people who are living with autism and to their families and friends.
I think a lot of people...
They don't fantasise about massacring children.
A lot of people will be questioning why on earth is there not a whole life order. If there's zero remorse for this person who already committed a mass killing, was planning an even bigger mass killing, I mean, why on earth is this person not going behind bars for the rest of his life?
Killing his mum, his brother, his sister, planning the massacre of 30 children and 2 teachers. I mean, it's quite incredible, isn't it?
Really shocking story. We'll have more on that, of course, later in the programme.